information in ahead of the session that we've got at the Digital Construction Week. So where are you based, Alan? Are you around London way?
Yeah, I'm in Wandsworth.
All right, okay. Would you be interested in coming to the event that we've got at Excel?
No, I'm going to FireX at Excel already. That's enough of Excel for 1 year.
But it's the same. It's the same time.
Oh, right. Well, I'm going there on the 16th.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, this is the 18th. Okay. Yeah, we've got a workshop on the 18th at midday. Just
okay.
And I mean, it might be that some of your members or your contacts could attend.
Yeah, yeah. And what's the workshop on?
It's basically preparing for it's understanding what we need to have in place for the safety case for the Building Safety Act. So what we're doing is last year we had a table for manufacturers, developers, designers, contractors, operations teams, and we're trying to replicate the same process. And the $64,000 question is, what information should we be collecting to satisfy the regulator? And
people
therefore,
have been producing these already. I guess they have, haven't they?
Yeah, but the regulators haven't decided whether they are adequate. Yeah, so what they're doing at the moment, I think there's something like probably 80 or so. The early adopters have produced their safety case reports. I'm talking about the housing associations and councils. So they've submitted them, but and none of them have been accepted.
They haven't been rejected either, though.
In some cases, they have been rejected. Yeah,
right.
But in general terms, it's been, not quite right. Please try again, sort of thing. But what they won't do is tell people what they actually want.
Ah.
And part of the view on that is because they don't know.
Yeah.
And what they're doing at the moment, it's a little bit like CDM. They'll come down on people when they haven't provided what's needed.
Right. I mean, who's writing these? I assume they're being written by fire engineers. Is that not the case?
Typically it's fire and structure.
Okay.
Yeah, and therefore they're typically being coordinated. There's a building safety case report. There's a safety case report, which is a snapshot in time to say, looking at, it's using a methodology. There's two methodologies that are used by these risk assessors. One is using something called bow tie, and the other is using HAZIP. I think it's called. So they're both risk-based assessments of safety. And what we're then trying to do is to answer those questions. So we're working through with a couple of several. I say we as in Active Plans, working through at the moment with a couple of councils and housing associations in terms of how they're compiling the information. There's also some specialists, company called Adelard, who we're working with at Tower Hamlets, where they're specialists in this sort of thing. They've come out of petrochem and nuclear and things like that.
Well, that's what HAZOC came from. That was actually invented by ICI back in the 70s. I think it's that old, HAZOC.
Ah, right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So what we want to try and do is identify that there's different views as to the level of detail that that people have got to be gathering. And the purpose of the meeting, the session at Digital Construction Week, is really to understand where people are. We had a development group meeting yesterday, which was very successful. We had about 20 people on that, did we, Richard? I think. So so we had, most of them were landlords.
Yeah.
And they were telling us quite a big variation in terms of where they're going. Some people are just recording documents and hoping that's going to be enough. Other people have got full 3D digital twins, and they're working on that basis. So I think it's a matter of probably somewhere between the two is probably the pragmatic solution to that. So yeah, from
a safety case, it's not at all clear what is required because none of them have been approved yet. It's interesting. Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So, Richard, do you want to coordinate things? Richard, are you there?
Hello, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Are we ready to go?
Yeah. I think we're ready.
Sorry, I've got an little dog, and just occasionally I get distracted. So sorry about that.
Of course.
Right. Well, George has explained why we're all here. We've had a number of these already. As he said, we're looking at what's going to be required with the safety case. Now, what came out of our meeting an hour ago, 2 hours ago, was people were a little bit confused and wanting a little bit more focus, George.
Okay.
So what I suggested, Paul Bray has sent through a document he's done on fire testing and fire safety for fire doors within his organisation, which we're going to look at. So basically, I think what we'll end up doing is pulling together the thoughts from these meetings so that we've got some good focus for the DCW event. So we've got something very specific. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. I think the thing is, certainly from all of the work that we've done on the Golden Thread initiative, the steer that we've had from the HSE is that the regulator is going to be looking at this as a risk-based approach, not a compliance-based approach.
Right.
What I mean,
okay.
What I mean, the difference between that is that it's all very well if you've got a fire door inspection and your fire doors are perfect, but if those fire doors aren't part of a system that's going to protect the spread of smoke, for example, then that's not really the answer the regulator is going to be looking for. So the important thing is that the overall scenario needs to be tested. That's what we've been told in the past, and I've certainly had that reiterated. It's also the case that they're being a bit vague in terms of what they're going to accept, and I think it's because the jury's out on that. What they don't want to do is, I guess, be too not prescriptive. They don't want to be prescriptive at all because they don't want to take liability. But what I think they're probably doing is that they're leaving it down to the industry to come back with what they believe is needed to keep things safe. And we've already discovered, haven't we, that in this room we've got like Nick with balconies, Chris with the cavity barriers, Jim's signage and lighting and things like that, Elliot with his kit, Roy with all the ironmongery, Alan's sprinklers, Stephen with the.
We're well covered, aren't we?
We are well covered, but the point,
well covered.
I guess what I'm saying is that there's a danger of everything being in silos. Yeah, and I think that's where we are at the moment. And what we're also seeing is that excuse me, Stephen and Elliot, because you've heard this before, but the fact is that the golden thread concept has been quite successful. In fact, possibly in some ways too successful, in the fact that everybody's now producing golden threads. So we're ending up with a landlord having, Asif, for example, from Berkeley, is going to end up with 10, 15, 20, 30 golden threads. There's going to be a golden thread that Elliot's bringing through on fire doors, and somebody else is going to be doing it on compartmentation or whatever. Jim, you're on mute, Jim.
I totally agree with you, George. We are in silos, but it's totally obvious from the whole process over the last 12 months that in actual fact we're also independent on all the other regimes being of the same quality as the stuff that's individually manufactured. In other words, everything depends on something else. When we looked at the venting, it was amazing how all the decisions were based on the understanding of the other components that were nothing to do with venting. It's the same with signing. Unless the lighting is of a sufficient quality, then the signing can't be seen. So this is where I at the moment I don't see the connection, because it leaves too many questions to be answered for the property manager, because we're all making lists around the checklist or the decision-making tree, and it comes up with more questions than answers at the moment.
Yes, Chris.
George, I wouldn't use the word silos. I think what you're getting, people are producing golden thread initiatives based on their understanding of what's required. And, there's a vacuum on exactly what's required. And you helped us the other week. We had our little round table, and that gave us some steps forward. But there's no consistency from anyone as to what the golden thread looks like. And I keep on hearing in various forums, not only to do with the golden thread, oh, that industry sort it out, that industry sort it out. But we've been given a really, really wide brief to try and sort anything out. And it's hardly surprising that you get businesses or industries going off and developing their own version of the golden thread. And until we get some template that says what is, what isn't, this is going to continue. And trying to have a common data platform for that that's interoperable is going to be nigh on impossible.
Well, that's
We
part
need
of
some
what we're trying
guidance.
to do. That's part of what we're trying to do, Chris, is
I know.
try and get some sort of coherence going there. But as you say, it's more than a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's silos so much, Richard, as people trying to do the best in the absence of any clear guidance.
Yeah, I didn't mean it as a criticism.
I didn't think you did, George.
It's more of actually looking at things, even with a particular product like fire stopping. We've got situations where, well, it's the common situation where the fire stopping report, let's say from Bolster or Plan Radar or whatever, it's actually related to an activity, which is the inspection, rather than the asset. And the result of that is that then you've got one organization going in, maybe doing some remedial works on for fire stopping, and they'll drop a pin down on a plan and they'll put a reference against it, which is great. We've got some really good information there. The trouble is, the next year somebody comes along and they're doing some work, they're not using that original reference, so therefore you end up with a slippage. So I think that in itself has been a big step forward in recognizing that needs to be done. So in other words, what we need to have is a unique ID that can then be used by all of the different systems that are going to be used, but they're all referencing back to that same unique ID. And I think, you know, if we can even do that, it's going to make it, you know, much easier for somebody like Asif at Barclay to manage quality. Asif, you've not said anything yet.
No, it was it's a very interesting conversation actually, and that, and I agree with you. You're spot on. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own version of the golden thread. We've got our own. We had no choice. We had to just crack on and develop one. What we have tried to do, obviously, is try to capture everything end to end. Kind of makes sense. Our main focus is that's how we manage our quality, but you know, and we've used the same method to then hopefully capture all of our golden thread information. I mean, you know, we're part way through that journey. So far so good, but you know, quite rightly, we've not had very good direction, to be fair, and we've also met with the building safety regulator, and again, I agree. It very much seems to be the case of industry need to come up with something that they'll then make a decision on as to whether they deem that acceptable. Not helpful, but that's where we are.
Have you actually submitted anything, Asif?
No, we've not submitted anything. There's ongoing talks at the moment. Obviously, we've submitted 5 statements, etc.
Sure,
but we've not submitted anything for Gateway 2. Certainly not Gateway 3. My understanding from my initial meeting with the building safety regulator is that essentially what we submit at Gateway 2 is, you know, that all they're going to do is check whether we're compliant with what we've submitted at Gateway 2 in order to get through Gateway 3. Now, there does seem to be some variations on that interpretation, but that's really my understanding of it. So everything centers around this Gateway 2 submission, and that's where we are still, in reality, a little bit confused.
Well, the other thing that in the major contractors, as you know, Asif, we've been working with Balfour Beatty and Bouygues and Mace and yourself as well. But one of the challenges that people are concerned about is change control. So what is now happening is that the if, for example, dampers, which are there's some safety critical items like dampers that are considered to be, and I guess sprinklers as well, would be in that guise. If you change them from what you originally say that you're going to use, and I think that this is they're expecting people to actually specifically say what they're going to use before the end of Gateway 2, then if you change them during Gateway 3, it goes into is it a 6-week process? Asif, are you aware of that?
I don't think that was actually set in stone when we had our meeting, but yes, that does ring a bell.
Yeah,
a kind of a 6-week process. I mean, we're quite good in that scenario. If we do change something, we do have quite a robust change control process, but I'm not sure whether it goes far enough, and there is variation across the group. So for example, St. George will do it in a slightly different way, possibly a better way than we will do it at East Thames. So again, the real challenge there is that, you know, do we have a standard way of managing that we can then evidence back to, you know, BSR?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we're doing at the moment, Asif, that has actually come out of the you know, Balfour Beatty and people, is actually having a BIM4HOUSING library of products that we can then product data, so it makes it easier to actually capture during that change control process the product that is actually being selected. So we're doing that as a free service to put them into a product library, just data sheets into a product library that can then be assembled. So Elliot and, you know, Chris, I've spoken to you about that as well. You know, so if we can do that, that might be something as well that obviously all of you as manufacturers can do. Just to make it easier for make, because the trouble is at the moment the way information is gathered is through O&Ms, and it's a bit chaotic really. So
George, are we ready to actually take that information, take those product sheets?
Yes. Yeah,
we
we've
are.
not.
So anybody
well,
here?
Yeah, we've just got to set the site up, but we're ready technically to do it, and we've got quite a few manufacturers now, or several manufacturers that have said that they're willing to put their data sheets up.
Okay, excellent. Jim, your hand's still up. Is that from before? Or...
You're on mute, Jim.
Okay, sorry. No, I meant to lower it.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Roy, would that be something that you'd be willing to do? I mean, basically, it's just a matter of having a library of data sheets.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we'd be happy to provide data sheets for the library.
Cool.
I'm not quite sure how easy that can allow substitution of certain solutions. But yeah, I guess it gives somewhere a reference point for the information, but and the compliance and the standards that it might meet the product, I guess.
Yeah, we're basically what we're trying to do is just make it so that at the moment the way O&Ms are compiled, on every single project somebody will come on and download, for example, a data sheet from Swigon for a product, and the people that are often compiling those that information may not be at all industry specialists at all, so they may pick the wrong product. So it's a massive overhead to the industry that we don't have. So the principal idea that we've come up with is just to have a single place that, I say a single place, a place. It doesn't have to be the single place, because people, you'll be putting stuff up on MBS and various other things, but that's a charged for service. This is free, and we're going to run it for about six months and see how it goes, and then look at how that information can be sustainably managed.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a challenge to manage, because how do you manage the how accurate and up to date the information is, because obviously products constantly change. So a data sheet that's correct as of now may not be, and may be out of date in a year's time.
Well, if it's a data sheet for a product, a product model, if the data sheet is different, surely that's a variant on the product.
Well, if a product changes, sometimes you can get variations in that product, but it's still called the same thing.
That's scary.
Maybe that should change. I can tell you that's not what the case. That's not the case for us.
No, I mean,
I have real bad experiences with the product selector that's currently done by the Royal British Architects, in terms of being not only out of date, but certainly incorrect in individual specifications for products, where they quote specification for product but not correct application information. So it is a bit of a nightmare, but that is down to manufacturers, obviously.
Completely.
But the other thing that I'm deeply concerned about is that we've spent, again, most of the time talking about application errors, installation errors, wrong specifications regarding specialist subcontractors, rather than individual products. There's been nothing wrong with the individual product in terms of specification. It's just how it's applied. And fire doors is a key example.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
I'm not convinced that just having a massive directory of products is helpful, really, because it's only to check upon a system. But that's my opinion.
Well, that's
Chris,
quite a
you've
valid
got your
point,
hand up.
because if you
Sorry.
think about the data sheets, yeah, a data sheet for a product doesn't necessarily, it might be suitable for use on a FIDAL, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's suitable for use on all permutations of FIDAL. So yeah, again, because it's a component of a system, that can be misleading, you know, to swap that product around.
But at least if you have the data sheet, you know what you've got. That's got to be the first thing. You know what you've got, and then if you want to change it, you know how to change it.
That's not necessarily so. It's not, because again,
otherwise you've no idea what you've bought. I mean, you've got to, if you bought something, you've got to have it specified somewhere what it is you bought. And then
Yeah.
things change, your knowledge evolves, you maybe want to make some changes, but at least you know what you had to start with.
but you've
Well,
got
we know-
also, the person that's doing the data sheet's got to know what questions are being asked.
Yes,
Because
and
I'll just give you one example. I've been involved in a huge debate on LinkedIn at the moment about whether arrow up or arrow down is the convention for evacuation. And yet it's so clear in guidance, but you can have a product with arrow up or arrow down, but you don't know how to use it. Now, if nobody asks a question, you just buy it because you think it's right. And that's where I have a problem with product selectors. Because
that's the application, though, isn't it?
Well, of course, obviously it's the application, yeah.
yeah, but George, you were referring to the fact between Gateway 2 and Gateway 3, you know, if a product is substituted or changed. Now, somebody looking at the data sheet might believe that they can change that product, but actually there may be an element of that product that actually means it's not suitable. So if you think about a fire door, yeah, if you've got a mortise lock of a certain size and you substitute it for a mortise lock of a slightly different size, well, that may not be within the fire test scope and certification. So
I entirely agree, and we're not trying to solve all of the problems at the moment in this particular regard. And you know, for example, the change control system within the contractor's organisation, in principle, should be robust enough to pick up that process. We're just trying to fix one little component in this, and that's having a data sheet of the product that was actually installed.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's not going to solve all of the problems, but I'll tell you what, it's a big start.
well, the CCPI and what's coming through for the Code of Practice for Construction Products Information should also help to make sure the information is accurate, unambiguous, and up to date, because you should have version numbers of your data sheets, so that if you do have a new data sheet because you've made a slight change to the product, then you should have a version number on there which will identify it.
Yeah, we've also been talking with Lloyd's Register, going to provide a service of verification that the manufacturer's data is coming through correctly. But that's an added sort of service that they can offer, nothing to do with us per se, but that would be a way of making sure that the data is actually as it should be from the manufacturer. So
Chris, you had your hand up. Have you put it down now?
Yeah,
You do it up.
well,
Just to interject a little bit on that data sheet, coming back to the data sheet, I agree with you, George, that the fitted item should have a data sheet, and that data sheet should go onto the asset register. I have experienced in the last 2 months data sheets of similar products being used on asset registers because they don't actually have the data sheet for the in situ product. So they've actually taken a data sheet from another database and placed it on their asset register. So it has to be something that's totally original from design right the way through the system that comes along that system, not one that's just been picked off of a database, in my opinion.
I'm just surprised you get stuff delivered without the data sheet. In our industry, it's the data sheets are all public. They're on the internet. You can find them. I just find this obviously there's something's fundamentally different here. But I mean, I can tell you for sprinklers, you can go and look up every manufacturer on the internet, and you can find their data sheets.
Yeah, the what I'm trying to get to, Alan, though, is that the task of actually matching the data sheet. I mean, I've personally been in. I've looked at this, and I've been onto manufacturers' websites to find the data sheets, and it isn't that easy. Yeah, and therefore, there is a barrier there. All I'm saying is that if and for everybody to always go and download it on every occasion just seems a bit crazy. So the manufacturer, or the if we've got a simpler way of and manufacturers can keep the data sheets up to date as well. Or they can provide the most current one and also historic ones.
George, finish a sentence so I can bring Chris in.
Sorry, carry on, Chris.
Chris.
It's okay. I think we're focusing on what it's not and what it is. From my point of view, in the absence of anything else, and there is nothing else, absence of lexicon or anything of that start, it's a start. So let's stop telling it what's wrong with it and let's work about what's right with it. And what's right with it is quite difficult, depending on the business, sometimes to access data sheets. You know, there's multiple clickings, logins, give me your data, give this, it puts people off. So to have a readily accessible data sheet repository, what's not to like? It's not going to hurt anything, and it might actually have some minor improvements. So I can pull holes in it all day long. It's not going to help anybody. I do take Roy's point. The CCPI will help improve the quality. And my only advice to you guys would be make sure that you put a big liability exclusion clause on it, because data sheets come in various sizes, qualities. Some of them aren't data sheets, they're glossy brochures. Others have actually got physical, meaningful data that you need to make a judgment about whether a product's suitable or not. But you shouldn't be responsible for the change control, George. Active Plan or anyone else should be. That's up to the manufacturers. And if the manufacturers don't want to deposit the data sheets there, fair enough. But
Yeah.
You've got nothing to lose by asking them to join in the endeavour. So let's just get on with it. Stop carping about it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Chris. What about you, Nick? You've said nothing.
Yeah, I think Chris has just summed it up quite well from my point of view as well. I think, look, I understand from a point of view, some people look at this and the lack of information and so on is bizarre, but I come from an industry which is full of customized products and so on, and the lack of a defined way of doing it. You know, we can be competing with products which are nothing like ours. They're actually made of concrete and so on. And there isn't that there. So certainly I'd agree with Chris. The first step is actually let's give something a try and get the key parameters in there, because particularly industries like ours will massively benefit from having standardized templates. And there's not a modern path we can already look at, if you like. It's not like EPDs and so on for a product where you've got a set category and that's the way you're approaching it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that is that what we're hoping to do is to hold at the very basic level a data sheet. That's one level, but if you've got EPD information, or if you've got declaration of performance information, either as a document or as data, then the system's designed to be able to hold that information as well. And we've got discussions going on with other people that are providing carbon data, for example.
So the baseline minimum to participate would be the data sheet,
Yes.
But if people want to get involved and give more information, that's available. That's possible to be done.
Absolutely. That's the principle. And also, if we can do this properly, there's an opportunity for manufacturers to know where their products have been used, which I think could be a very beneficial thing.
Right.
So just something that's occurred to me as we've been talking here is, I worked with the GAI, one of the working groups, to develop product data sheets for BIM, which effectively have all of the relevant data that applies to a product. You know, the standards compliance, you know, the physical information about the product, the dimensions, also about the current draw when it's electrified product, all of that stuff. And it makes me wonder whether or not, you know, there should be a standardized way of producing these data sheets, which is then accessible, and perhaps that the use of the product data sheet, which could feed into Kobe, is the right solution.
Absolutely, Roy. I don't know if you know, but I've spent 7 years on this to try and effect that. That's what Lexicon is, and the templater that we put together. One of the biggest challenges, which you were actively involved in that, weren't you?
I say I worked with the Guild of Architectural Ironmongers on their working group to develop the door hardware product data sheets, the templates for all of the various types of door hardware.
Absolutely, and I think you guys did a brilliant job on that. And if those are available, then they can be used. Absolutely. The point is, what we've discovered, and Chris has just made a interesting comment. The challenge is getting people to agree what data and properties are needed for a smoke damper or for a cavity barrier. There are very many different views, and it depends really on how people are going to use the information. And I'm passionately keen to have all of this machine readable. I'm passionately keen to have it all standardized, but our attempts to do that mean that 7 years from starting the Lexicon initiative, we still don't have it. There's some people that have done it, like the Guild of Architects, Architectural Ironmongery, but there are very few. So the principle of the just doing something with data sheets is just a starting point.
Alan, are you up for that?
I think you're frozen, Roy.
Did you ask me?
Yeah.
I mean, I just represent an association, so it's up to each individual company if they want to be involved in this or not.
Sure, but I was just asking your view. Do you think it's valuable?
I mean, sometimes we get messages on the internet, you know, we need to replace this sprinkler. It's 30 years old. Does anybody know whose it is? And, you know, what's the replacement suitable for it? So that kind of question would be, you know, with this kind of information would be useful if for a project we were able to say, because right now, you know, 30 years ago, nobody's quite sure what it was that was used. You might actually now know. So that would be useful. I got one from Sweden just this week, actually, where they tested some sprinklers and they weren't actually sure who'd made them. You know, and that sort of thing would be much tighter if you actually had a digital record. So that's and you know, all of these manufacturers have produced BIM objects for you know, for the different software that's out there. So, you know, and there aren't many. You know, there's only 5 in the UK. Only 5 manufacturers of sprinklers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of installers, but there's only 5 manufacturers because some of these sprinklers cost, you know, a couple of million to develop it. So, you know, you need to be a reasonable sized company to even try that.
Okay, that's good. So
I mean, they will be at FireX, at least some of them will, so I can ask them.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I think I've probably, I think we've actually approached several of them, Alan. So I'll share with you the people that we've approached. So I went to the NEC during the week.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of what preparing for the event, do you see as manufacturers, do you see that you're ready for what's going to be asked of you from the from now, really, whilst we're rolling into the whole Building Safety Act?
Chris.
Yes and no. I'd like to, and it comes back to the thing, we don't know what the question is, so how am I supposed to give the answer? But we've got our own version and our own understanding of what we think is pertinent and required, and in what format it's acceptable, how we're going to transact and pass the information off. But it's going to be a work in progress, George. And I think any manufacturer that says it's got this licked is either very lucky or very wrong. One of the two. I think we're all full of good intentions and wanting to go in the right direction, but the lack of a template or the lack of anything. The only thing I've seen, George, is the CILB came out with a, I think they called it a safety critical systems document recently, and it actually referenced cavity barriers, and you know, I thought, hallelujah, and it actually makes sense. So we're going to kind of follow that and just get all of the documents and in a digital format ready for that, and build on that as a starter for 10. But yeah, I mentioned earlier the lack of coherence amongst some trade associations. I'm very disappointed in our prime trade association, who haven't done a very good job at all of getting us together. I mean, agreeing a product data template for a cavity barrier should be really easy. It's a couple of hours work, but it seems to just kind of defeat us. Politics gets in the way, and you know, some manufacturers have got certain data that others haven't, and of course they want that in the template, so it makes other people look bad. But,
Yeah,
you know, and there we go. And I said, well, let's have an enhanced data. You can have two data sets. You can have a basic and say there's a basic one that covers the, you know, and there's an advanced one. But we just went round and round in circles. So I think the industry's partially ready, George, and in various pockets more kind of prepared than others. I'd be interested in Nick's view on this as well, because I know I bump into him quite a lot at similar events. So, I mean, I don't know, Nick, how well do you think you guys are ready?
I don't feel very prepared. I'm always a little bit skeptical with more conferences I go to as to kind of perhaps the further away from the goal we actually are. So I don't know quite how to answer yourself, because I don't really know what the question clearly is, really. So yeah, I get the impression that as an industry, well, take CE marking and something so as basic as that, which came in back in 2017 for EN 1090, it was like a massive thing which was left to the last minute across our industry. I suspect that generally the metalwork industry is very backward on that. We've obviously done quite a bit of work on getting ready for certain templates and stuff for our data, but I suspect we're probably quite far behind us. Is the honest answer.
I don't want to keep being negative, Nelly, and you sounded a bit negative, Nelly, then, Chris. But the thing about my particular disciplines and is that when the legislators missed out emergency lighting off of a fundamental arrangement for the fire safety bill, and my products absolutely and utterly depend on illumination. So in terms of putting data sheets together that are meaningful, and I take your point, we try to do our best on a technical basis, but putting more technical costs into manufacturing these days, because, you know, whilst you probably burn the midnight oil, and so do I, putting the technical notes together, and I'm always being asked about AI. Why don't you put your brain, Jim, into a computer? And then people, well, it's hours and hours of technical work. And at the moment, I concur with everybody. We don't seem to get much help for conformance or compliance, because this whole wishy-washy area of suitable and sufficient and risk-based solutions, the arguments are abating on forums regarding fire doors, and people wanting to replace fire doors because of singular tests rather than looking at it in context. So I do concur with you, Chris. It's very difficult to make that investment decision to go round and go down the route of making a specification sheet, in our case, for 4,000 individual products and their application. We've got 5 sizes of everything specifically to meet British standards and international standards for viewing distance. So, and as I say, the context really matters. For me to write one data sheet about one single escape route sign is at least 3 hours to 4 hours work, and it's an investment decision, because nobody minds doing it if it's going to be used properly. But when I actually see some of the stuff that I've actually written as framework agreements being used to describe somebody else's product because it happens to look similar or the same, it irks me immensely. I have got people using descriptions that I have written against signs that don't actually illuminate. And so in terms of the digital world, I am a bit negative Nelly, unfortunate, but I think that it also means that there are traps and problems around this being fitted in buildings. But that's where I am at the moment.
Alan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know how others see this, but I also sit on BS991 on the panel that's revising that standard, and that is a code of practice for fire safety in residential buildings. So I would have thought that something like that would be the starting point for this, that you could say, right, we're going to comply with that. Then all of the different disciplines we're talking about today would be how to show that the escape signs complied with it, how to show the doors complied with it, or the compartmentation in general, or the cavity barriers, or in my case, the sprinkler system. How do you show for each of those that they've complied with it? But the way they fit together is something like BS991 or ADB, or if you don't want to use either of those, then you have a fire engineer design. So that's got to be the umbrella part, and then everything else hangs under it. So I have no idea, Jim, if we refer to, I hope we do, if we refer to an appropriate standard for escape signs in BS991. If we don't, we should. But I assume there's one out there, and it's very probable we do refer to it. And you know, then presumably within that standard, there's some way of deciding if something complies or not. And for my area, sprinklers, you know, the actual component itself is just a component of a system, which is unique to every building. Obviously, you know, every building's different, so you might be using the same components, but not the same numbers of them, and not put it in the same way. So the way we would say that that's done is you actually have an independent expert that come along and look at it and say, yep, this is good, or no, the pump's got a problem, or this valve has got a, you know, each little bit, and that's how we would deal with it. You know, so we wouldn't actually be working off any kind of online thing, because that's never going to tell you what you need to know. You actually need to go and look at the system. Every product, you know, every discipline will have a different way of doing this. But I guess this is what we're trying to do here. Find for each one, how do you show that that bit's complied? You can't know, Jim, if your sign is fine, the lighting is another thing. So someone else has to sort out the lighting and how that's okay. And I appreciate that if it's pitch black, it doesn't help what sign, the sign is not going to work.
Well, what I'm saying is that in terms of the procurement side, because bearing in mind the data is for procurement and design purposes as well, you cannot separate one from the other, because the whole decision around a strategy for escape is about viewing distances.
Well, it's also the width of the stairway and the width of the staircase,
Yes,
and how many of them there are and how far apart
exactly.
they are and all of that, that all goes into it.
And there is a standard for it, but there is data, and I don't want to be negative Nelly, but industry does not want to follow British standards as a compliance. They don't mind following it as a conformance, but they don't want to do it as a compliance issue. They want to do it their own way. And as I say, there are standards there, but they maintain that manufacturers have made standards more onerous in maintenance and supply of products than is necessary. And I actually sometimes believe that that is the case. And as I say, so the thing is that I am concerned, and I would love it, because I have been responsible for the application standards, writing the application standards for safety way guidance systems, and that's what I argue about on a daily basis. But it's not followed. It is not followed as a general rule. I was in a hotel only this morning to find a mixture of different types of signs all over the place. And I'm sure if you look around all your buildings, you will see that signs are in one big mess. And of course, unfortunately, in a forum like this, where I'm asked to talk on my specialist subject, I carp up about what the problem is in my own backyard. And I'm sorry about that. But
no, not at all. That's why you're here, because you're a specialist, Jim.
Yeah. I don't even know what the standard is for, or it's probably several for signs. I just hope we refer to it in 9991. And I can tell you, all of this came out of Grenfell, and I've been on that committee for quite a while. We never talked about facades. We never did. We just copied across what was in ADB without really thinking about it. And that's possibly what we've done with signs. If there is something in ADB, I wouldn't be surprised if we just copied that across, because it wasn't perceived as a problem.
Well, ADB, I've written. I did the writing in Scotland first for the signing regarding fire and rescue deployment, which is nothing to do with escape signs and nothing to do with safety signs. But it was out of Grenfell, out of Lacanau, as a function of fire and rescue deployment in tall buildings, trying to locate people and their own manpower, and also to set up their own firefighting activities. Yeah. So, but having said that, ADB is not clear. So there are problems. There are problems in the guidance, and there are problems in the standards arena that some people find easy to say, "Oh, that's a load of rubbish. You don't follow that. Don't do that maintenance regime. Oh, that's too onerous. Let's draw up a variation." And as I say, sorry, Chris, for being a negative Nelly. Yeah, we should get on with it, but I have seen this, and I did a lot of work with the architects, with their panel of experts that theoretically looked over product selector, bearing in mind they wanted £12,000 from even a smaller manufacturer to go on product selector. So George, you've got to put a price on your database if you're going to maintain it. But as I say, rubbish in and rubbish out, as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, we'll have to be careful. I think that's definitely true. We've got to. Roy.
Well, the point I was going to make is, coming back to something we said earlier in this meeting, is about the regulator leaving it up to industry to decide and taking a risk-based approach. the reality is that industry will do what is commercially beneficial for industry. Yeah, they won't do any more than that. And if you leave it as a risk-based approach, we've already seen with approved document B in the way that that's written, you know, often it is a risk-based approach, and people will always take the cheapest option, which may not be the best or the best practice option. And you know, that's why the regulator really does need to understand the applications and actually apply some regulations, in my opinion.
Okay.
Well said.
Yeah. As far as we're concerned, obviously we're just trying to, as a group, try and do the best that we can, aren't we? Really.
That's all we can do.
Yeah. And where I'm coming at this from a BIM perspective, or better information management, is being able to provide clearer information about the products that are being installed so that those can be recorded more easily, and also make it so that one of the things that we're looking at is how can we tie the specification into that same context, so we've got the product and the specification tied together. Now, one of the approaches that we're taking as well is to see how we can align using standardized naming a product against an object in let's say a Revit model, so that we can tie together the information without so the connection between the specified product and the manufactured product that is going to satisfy it. So that is a way forward to be able to record the two things. So that's the journey that we're following at the moment. And by doing that, it means that we'll be able to automatically produce COBie, which I think will be a big step forward. But I suppose the question really is, as far as the manufacturer's role in this, you're the experts in terms of the product that satisfies the generic requirement, aren't you? And therefore, what we want to try and do is make it so that the client organizations have got more visibility of what products are available, so that we can encourage I think developers to actually start having an approved list of products that suit their requirements, at least as a baseline, so there's a degree of consistency across it, because just everything being open is commercially maybe, you know, viable, but from a practical point of view, it probably doesn't make so much sense.
What you mean, like a preferred supplier list kind of thing?
Yeah, well, some owners are already starting down that route, so that they can have things that they know work, and therefore they've got a degree of standardization across their projects. And certainly for the fire critical items, I think that would make sense to do. I'm not saying that would be prescriptive, but certainly it would give a good steer to people. What would you feel about that, Roy?
Well, just to jump in there, it's Asif, just to jump in there. That is quite common practice. We do have preferred products, and we certainly have preferred suppliers. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's great.
Cool. Okay.
That's where we would spend our time as a manufacturer with individual customers that share all of the values, and that's where we actually share the information. But you know, this forum is to make it in a wider perspective, and that unfortunately is where I do have problems, because it needs to be managed. It needs to be managed.
Just to jump in again, the issue we have is that we're not necessarily always the decision maker. So obviously, yes, we have the final sign off or the approval, but we're heavily reliant on you know, a fire strategy developed by fire engineers, etc. So we have our decisions are heavily based on contractors, consultants, etc. As we go through, and they need to source information and to provide us with that information so that we can then review, approved, you know, however we want to look at it. So all of this is still very, very useful. You know, we are, you know, developing the end product, so to speak, and you know, we've got our own you know, potential customers lined up to purchase our properties, but you know, ultimately we are reliant on quite a big network of people, and everybody in that network needs access to the right information.
Cool. Okay, so as manufacturers, what would make it easier for you to be able to deliver what you believe you're going to be needed? I guess it's early involvement, early engagement, clearer specifications. What would you suggest?
I guess as a manufacturer, our responsibility is to make sure the product information is accurate, up to date, and in a form that can be understood.
Yeah, you also need to know, or you want to know, where it's going to be installed there, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean, we often won't be the specifier that actually specifies it into the application. Yeah, we will be on occasion, but the majority of the time, you know, we don't actively specify the product into the application. You know, it's a sorry, my battery's running low. It's a door supplier, you know, because obviously from a door hardware perspective, we're only a component of the door set that's being supplied. So it's a question of making sure that information is readily available to people so they can make informed choices, I guess.
Could I also ask, thank you, Roy, could I also ask, do you each have recommended maintenance or inspection methods that you would want to see followed?
As an industry, for fire doors and escape doors, there's plenty of information available from the trade organisations as well as from the manufacturer's own information as well. Yes.
I can tell you for sprinklers, we have pages and pages about this in our standards.
But would they vary according to different manufacturers?
No, this is it's actually it's a European standard, so it's a British standard. It's a it's a German standard. No. But it's for the system. It's not for the I mean, the sprinkler itself has no moving parts. It's for the system as a whole.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. So would that be similar to what's in SFG 20, or is it more detailed than that?
I'm not familiar with SFG 20.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know what it is? It's the building services.
What does SFG stand for?
That's a good question. It's BISA, the Building and Environmental Services Association. It's the standard that all maintenance for mechanical items, M&E items, is done.
I don't know. I mean, this standard is written by people in the sprinkler industry. As one of the BSI committees. There's nobody from BISA in the meeting.
Okay. So does it give a step-by-step set of instructions as
Well,
to
it says, you know, this is what you should do every day. This is what you should do every week. This is what you should do every month. This is every quarter. This is every year. And then, you know, all the different things you should do. And there's some check sheets, you know, things you run tests basically. The idea is that you can be fairly sure a sprinkler system is going to work if you open a valve at the end of the pipe and water comes out and the pump starts, you know, bluntly, and you're testing that kind of thing. And then you don't want to do that too often, so you're doing things less often to be fairly sure that when you do that, it will work.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Well, the other thing I can say, George, in respect to signs, is that everything that we're discussing is actually in a British standard, and but we came into this discussion with trying to short form, having to read all the standards, because there's 7 quite extensive standards to do with signs. I'm talking about fire signs and safety signs. So, and they deal with the maintenance regime and the review of the applications and everything. So, but I doubt if British standards are going to put that on a public forum. They're hugely expensive items. So this is.
You've gone on mute, Jim.
Well, as I say, it's another problem that needs addressing, because I agree with Alan. You know, the standards are there, the standards for continual improvement, the standards for, as I say, for application, for context, for maintenance, everything is there, but nobody wants to hold those as prescriptive. And if I were to write one for BIM, it would be exactly the same as British standards.
Certainly, George, from our industry perspective, there isn't any standards already, but we have our own published documents for that.
Yeah.
It basically depends how good the cleaning regime on the outside of facade is.
Cool. Okay. Stephen.
We have a similar thing, so our IONMs will have a maintenance regime in, but that's linked back to harmonised product standards, and they're also referred to in things like BS 9991 and 9999. So it goes all the way through. The only challenge we ever have is sometimes they conflict with each other, which can always make it a challenge to which one takes precedence.
Okay, so the information that you might need to be able to provide the data that you are expected to, going back to the question, what would you need from designers? What would you need from clients to deliver the information that you need? The impression I get is that we've got product data, fantastic. That's what we want to move forward with, but you also want the context in which the product's going to be used, don't you?
Certainly so. Certainly so.
So maybe that's the focus of it. With what we're doing with the Digital Construction Week. So how can we then, you know, what questions would you be asking of Asif, for example, as a developer, or as you know, from PRP as architects or whatever? How could they improve the way in which the golden thread is put together?
But you're trying to sort of marry something. With one hand, we're trying to make something standardized so that it's more straightforward and easy. But then with the other hand, we've got to consider context, which by definition is unique. So
yes.
But that's the crux of the difficulty, isn't it?
Well, you know, in terms of repeating what I've said in the design forums, there's got to be somebody that actually understands the discipline within the design. because again, whether we're making space for ventilation, or whether we've got a specific strategy for escape, and I've said this again in terms of the purpose group of the construction. Sometimes because they're speculative, these things are unknown. So then you ask the stakeholders the questions that are required in order to work a decision tree, and there's no one that knows at that end of the project.
So if that's the case, Jim, I absolutely agree with you, and that's obviously what we've also been talking about in the construction group. The whole idea of moving the involvement of specialists into work stage, certainly work stage 4, before you go into construction, is something that is being talked about a lot. So how can we do that in such a way that you're compensated for the time that's put in there? Because
well, I make the suggestion that has to be paid for as consultancy. If somebody and of course I'm doing that actually most of the time these days, because it's so funny that somebody would say, well, you know what statutory signs are needed. Well, I'm saying, well, hang on a minute, who's discussed this with the local authority, the enforcement authority, because that's what's required right up front. Nobody. Oh, we'll see our fire engineer. Oh no, I'm nothing to do with signs. And the whole runaround goes because everybody believes, oh, it's just signs. That'll be easy. That's an easy number. Yeah, just stick anything up you like by the fire alarm call points telling them what to do in the case of fire. How many single story buildings do I see where it says do not use the lifts on it? And it's crazy, because there's not any regard for it in the design of the construction, because everybody believes that these things are just off the shelf and you can buy them and you can stick anything you like up there, and it'll be perfectly okay because nobody will need it. Well, perhaps they don't. I've actually said if the signs don't make sense, take them down. It's better to have none than have stuff that's meaningless.
Asif, yeah, you've been in the conversations, haven't you, with the other tier ones, with regard to trying to make this or take decisions earlier in terms of product selection. How are you thinking that might happen?
I can only say that at the moment it isn't happening because we have no end of procurement issues. Everything at the moment is being procured late. Everything's been all the decisions are being made very late. We've just, and I think this is an industry-wide problem, not just us, but from our own experience at the moment, building is quite painful. Obviously, there's a lot of change, but because of the economic situation, it's all very, very late. So it's a hard conversation at the moment. That is normally, I think everyone in the industry wants decisions to be made earlier. We made a big push for that, I would say 2.5 years ago. But at the moment, it's a very difficult question to answer.
What about contractor design portion and the discussions that certainly you've been having around that? Is that's part of this same issue, isn't it?
It is, and again, that is at this moment in time very, very late. We have a rule that we don't allow our contractors to start without all the appropriate paperwork in place, all the right approvals, and unfortunately, it's having a knock-on effect. So we are, and this is across the board with all our projects, we are very, very late with everything at this moment in time. So I know where we would like to be, but at this moment in time, we're not. We're far from that.
Okay. So from manufacturer's point of view, for Swigon, for example, if you were to be involved earlier in the process, Stephen, what the risk is that you're sharing obviously your knowledge and the time, and then they may pick a different product. I mean, yeah.
There is. I suppose I'm a bit more pragmatic with it, because if I've educated someone to the point that they don't end up buying my product, they buy a competitor's, at least there's a chance that it's going to be done right, even if we haven't got the sale out of it. I suppose that the challenge, and we always want early engagement up front. One of our single biggest headaches at the minute is walls, because that they will put all of the walls up and then they'll decide whose damper they're going to fit in. And when you've got 47 types of flexible wall and only 4 of them meet the standard requirements, effectively everything else becomes a test. And it's because someone in procurement thinks that they've saved 2% by changing supplier. But what they've done is written out all of the sort of supporting test data that anyone who's breaching that compartment has got, because they've now gone to a system where no one's got any data. So the earlier we can get involved and have an influence on that and explain what data it is that we have, what systems they can install it in, what systems they can't install it in, what they then choose to do is then down to them, not us. So we won't select the application for them. We'll tell them what we've got. So we'll tell them how we've tested, what we've tested in, what the performance criteria is. It's down to them or our customer to choose what product he's going to have and how he's going to go forward with it. It becomes very difficult when you get a phone call saying that all the walls have gone up and they've all got holes in and all the holes are the wrong size. And they've now got to try and find a way of putting product into it.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we're going to run. We're planning to run something. I think I've told you with the finishers and interior specialists group.
Oh, is it FIS?
Yeah, with FIS in McKilwee, and I think I've mentioned it to you as well, haven't I, Elliot? So there's the idea is that we'll also have BG and Knauf and people like that involved. So we're going to try and look at that from a system perspective, to see the as you say the relationship between those. Okay. And also relate it to smoke control and things. Yes, Elliot.
Yep. Apologies that I've been in and out. Had a couple of meetings to jump into on Teams. So if I'm going over old ground or if I'm repeating anything, I do apologise. But to your point, Stephen, about people specifying and putting things in first, it would be immensely useful if we had almost a database that when you selected one product, it whittled down what you could then choose as a result of choosing that product. For example, if you start with the front, I don't know how you how you go about doing it, but I don't know, starting with your footings. Once you put your footings in, what products then go on top of that? So when you then choose a wall, if you've got, I don't know, 20 different substrates from paper through to concrete, it will then whittle down the products that you can link.
You can and can't use, and some excuse me, some of it is that there's a lot of flexibility because our standards talk around what they call standard supporting constructions. So these are walls that have got known behavior under fire conditions, and all the time, which is what most manufacturers would test. And all the time people are building walls that meet those requirements. Everything is easier from an interchangeability perspective. You can, aside from potentially, the opening, if you've already got your opening made in the wall, being a bit of a headache, at least the actual construction of the wall is potentially suitable. It's when people deviate away from that, and the one that causes no end of havoc in the UK at the minute is shaft walls. So these are kind of asymmetrical walls that are built from one side. Under standards, they're all considered specific supporting constructions. So it's a fire test, and if you change supplier, your test data is not valid, so you're retesting. So it becomes a bit of a monster to try and manage, and that along with the cost of testing in itself, and it's not one test, it's 2 tests at least,
and it's timing.
It's timing, And you'll have one customer that wants to do that, and then you've got another customer that's decided that they're going to use a CANAF system rather than a BG system. So you go through that exercise again, and yeah, and then they still want 40% discount and want it 2 weeks ago. It's from a business case perspective, it doesn't stack up half the time. So it does make a bit of a headache. But yeah, something that would ultimately whittle down who's, based on your wall type, what penetration seal options it now gives you for everything else. Because of course, this information relates to, cable, anything you're putting through that wall that requires a penetration seal, whether it's a duct, a damper, a cable tray, a pipe, that they all kind of lead back to the same, standards and the same requirements. We just all have slight variations in our sort of specific standards. So something that could whittle it down for someone, that they could look at the potential impact of a decision, to save 5% on your wall construction. If it's going to put your component cost up of your dampers and your ductwork and your penetration seals, you might not end up saving any money.
Absolutely. Especially if you look at some of the wall construction. So we've tested in many different wall structures, but the one thing we haven't is tested in is no fines, and not many people have. But you'd be amazed how many people will still put their door in there, and you have no idea how that door is going to distort and react because the substructure is completely different and untested. So yeah, I suppose.
What did you say? No fines?
Yeah, so it's it's the composite of whatever the substructure is. It's like a solid, and there's either fines or no fines, or I don't know the exact terminology, but it is quite common in high-rise flat and certainly in masonettes and kind of four-story buildings, especially around the anything built anywhere between the 60s and the 80s. And obviously they're heavily being retrospectively fitted out, and people just are putting doors in against them, and when there's an actual fire, the door could virtually fall out because the way you're fixing materials go into them, they won't hold under the heat.
Okay. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I've got a question to ask, if that's all right, Richard. In terms of the information that you've got, declarations of performance.
Yep.
Would all of you, Jim, would you have declarations of performance for your products or not? You're on mute, Jim. You're still on mute.
We conform to recognised standards 17398, durability, characteristics and performance. So that's the way we've always operated, to take best guidance, and because it's international and British, it should be understood, but it isn't by the rest of industry. They don't care.
No, I guess what I'm asking is, so that, for example, I know that on certain types of products there is a declaration of performance that's been assessed against a harmonized standard. Is that something that the products
it's something that we do, yeah, but it's not on every single product that J-Lite manufacture, because
no,
it's only on the branded products of J-Lite that there's recognized conformance, because believe it or not, we do have customers that insist on having things manufactured not to standard.
No. How about you, Nick?
There's certain standards, obviously, EN 1090 is one I referenced earlier. There's others like the Euro codes, but no, there's quite a mix of different ones which we have in that side of things, and then we've got our own forms of testing and so on, because we've in a lot of cases some of the components and parts of the system actually fall between standards or between testing standards.
So it's not as straightforward as I'm asking that if
No.
there's a product, so I was thinking of it simplistically, that if we've got a product with a product data sheet and there is a declaration of performance, would there be a literally, it's a binary thing, has there do we have a document?
I think it'll probably depend on the product.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I was going to say, George, in our context, I think it's probably the sub, there's probably one for structural performance and so on,
Yeah.
and there's certain for kind of different parts of what that is really.
It has to be taken into context as well. People do have to at least read the forward of each individual standard to understand the context.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, there's the colour of safety signs, which is one standard, and there's a conformance to that. So, but if you were talking about specifically fire and the behaviour in fire, then that is in 17398. But I think you have to be very clear about what specification you're actually asking for. Otherwise, people say, "Oh, well, I've seen all the standards; it all conforms," but it doesn't, because I know one manufacturer that are making escape route signs out of flammable material, and that's because nobody asks. It's polyurethane.
Alan, presumably you would have declarations of performance on your products, would you?
Well, yeah, I mean the basic components, and some of them are covered by harmonized European standards and the UK equivalent, so they have to have CA or UKCA marking on them. But those standards are actually about 20 years old. So anything that's been invented in the last couple of decades doesn't have a harmonized standard. But nevertheless, as I said earlier, there would always be data sheets for them.
Yeah.
And the application of them is covered then. So many of these things have standards for the component itself, and then there's an installation standard for how you use it too. So we're trying. We haven't quite got everything nailed down as much as we, but at the moment. But in a year or two, we pretty much will have all the I's dotted and T's crossed.
Thank you. And Stephen,
Yeah, absolutely,
you've got
because
them,
they're harmonized products under the CPR, so there's a requirement that we have to have a declaration of performance. Makes it very easy from that respect, because there's no grey area with it. We have to have it. So
there's nowhere there's a database to say which products would or wouldn't have declarations of performance, is there?
I think the declaration of performance is very much linked to the construction product regulation, and probably European technical assessments. Paul White is probably the font of all knowledge on those kind of things.
Yeah. Okay.
So it could be, it could well be that everything under CPR needs to have a DOP. I'm not sure whether it's everything or it depends on its AVCP level or not.
Okay.
I'm not sure either.
I mean, say ours are system one, so
is ours. So is ours.
So it's kind of a no-brainer because you're at the top, so you have to. So it gets around that one, I suppose. But yeah, Paul is probably your best person to ask.
And what about doors, Elliot? Do you have declaration of performance on doors?
We do. Upside down, sideways. There's a million different DOPs. We also have XAPs. We have restrictions in place as to how you can't test. So some doors you can test mins and maxes. So if it's a standard door, you can test your smallest size, your biggest size, and then that will allow you to manufacture anything in between. However, if you add a side light or a top light, you under the DOP, you can only reduce it by 25% at a time, and you have to test in increments of 25%, which is ludicrous because it means you can never test to your smallest possible opening, but they're the current rules. So long-winded answer, yes, we do have hundreds of them.
Okay, good. And last question, environmental product declarations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're working on them.
Moving swiftly on.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
we've done an overall statement in as a manufacturer under 14001. So, and that does take into account the products that are being manufactured as well. But I have some great skepticism around how the carbon numbers are allowed to be calculated when you can ignore so much stuff up front. And you know, I buy in PVC, for instance, and I'm not allowed to ask what the credentials are from the people that we actually get the PVC from. I take the details from the fact that it's PVC. So
Yeah,
I
think
find it more academic than actually real. I'm not a great supporter of this carbon neutral whole basis of how it's sorted out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work going on in that area. I tend to agree with you that it's too woolly.
Okay, Jim. The boat that our stock comes over from Taiwan, we've put a sail on it just to make it carbon neutral.
Well done. At least that's.
Well, there we go. We just put a couple of mainsails up, and off they come over from Taiwan.
Yeah, but you put
I
a
think
double-sized motor in it in case because of the drag factor. Yeah.
So George, have you got everything you need now for DCW from the manufacturing group?
I think so. Yeah, and it would be good to know if you know who's actually going to come along on. Asif, are you going to come this year?
I was with you last year. I am trying to rally the troops as well.
Fantastic.
So I'm hoping that I can bring along somebody from Group IT, as well as myself, as well as one of my colleagues from Southern. So leave that with me. I'm working on it.
Good. Okay. And anybody else? Nick, are you planning to be there?
yeah, we've got a stand we're exhibiting, so I'll be there Monday and Tuesday personally. Sorry, not Monday and Tuesday. The first 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sorry.
We're on the Thursday, I think.
Yeah,
we're on the 18th.
13th Thursday. Yeah.
Oh.
I
Okay.
might be able to shift that around and switch Wednesday for the Thursday potentially, George.
Okay, that would be good.
And I'll be there. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And Elliot's going to be there.
Yeah, we've got a stand there. Not on digital construction. We're on in Firex.
I'll be there as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I will be there. I'm sure I'll bump into you sometime, but I'm helping with the Tall Buildings Group conference, and so I'll be buzzing all around for the 3 days.
Okay, good.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks very much indeed for that. It's very helpful, especially if you're coming along. So I'm not sure when the next manufacturing group meeting is. I hope we'll be back for that. So thank you very much, and good afternoon. See you soon.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.